All right. Good morning, everybody. Let's make our way to our seats. We're gonna finish this here sermon series out today on trouble, trust, and triumph. So let's all gather here. So to start this out, I wanted to ask a question. Have you ever been in a situation? You don't have to raise your hands, but you can if you want. I won't stop you. Have you ever been in a situation in which you wanted to know what God was up to, but you just didn't know what he was doing? You had no idea what was going on. I think we've all, yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think we have all experienced that at times, and at least when I reflect on that kind of experience, more often than not, I think it's in times of hardship. And I mean, it's just the reality. I've had my fair share of hardships, of suffering. But as I was thinking about this whole idea of being like disillusioned, being confused at what God was doing because I was going through something hard, a specific story jumped to my mind, and it happened on March 16th of 2019. So Elise and I had been in Bellingham, Washington for our first year working as campus ministers, and as a congregation that was supported by the bigger church in Seattle. They weren't able to keep us on, but they had a job for us back in Seattle. So we came back to Seattle, and within a couple months, we had our marriage retreat, which we got to participate in. And it was a lot of fun until I started getting these texts from my brother. I saw I had a missed call from my mom, and my phone started getting blown up by my brother. And he said, "You have to call mom, stop whatever you're doing, drop everything, and call your mom." Wow, I'm getting really emotional about it. And so I go out of the room and I call my mom, and I'm like, "What's going on? Like, Trevor doesn't usually act like this. Why is he texting me like this?" And she said, your dad was coming back from work because he worked as an auto detailer. He would do late nights washing buses and vehicles for different companies. He was coming back late from work and got in a car accident and died. And I was just in shock. Here I am at a marriage retreat, which I don't know about you, but for me, those are some of the most fun events, really exciting. It's really cool to spend time with your spouse. And here just my mind totally shifts. And I'm just in this fog. I'm in this daze. I don't know what to do with myself. Totally in shock. Go back to where we were sitting in the auditorium, which was literally in the front row, and told our mentors at the time, and Elise, said, "Hey, I just got this news that my dad died." And they're like, "Whatever you need, you can." I mean, gosh, if you have to go home, if you just want to go to your room, do whatever you have to do. And so Elise and I went back into the room, and all I could think to do was to just take a shower. I just got down on my knees, and I was weeping. I'm not really too much of a crier, but I'm talking profusely weeping before God. And within that time, I'm just wrestling with God. I'm not understanding, why has this happened? What's going on? And was able to work it out. I don't know how long I was in there, but I was able to work it out with God, where I've started repeating the phrase, "Your will be done, your will be done, your will be done." But at the same time, I had no clarity as to why that happened. I had no answer as to why that happened. So, at times like these, it can be difficult to reconcile God's goodness with the depth of our pain. And like we've been talking about in this series about trouble, there's real trouble in this life. Real times that require us to trust. And it could be easy in those times to despair and start to think nothing good could come of this. It's impossible. Absolutely nothing good could come of this. I couldn't picture, certainly in that moment, any good coming from that. And so as we wrap up this series, we talk about triumph. I'd like to help give you the tools to embrace the mystery of God's path to victory. That's the title today. So today for Palm Sunday, which is a day that we remember Christ triumphantly going into Jerusalem on a donkey. That's the main passage we're going to look at today. This is an incredibly important story. So much so that even though the gospel accounts vary in different ways, this is one of the stories that they all make sure to tell. It's a very important, very significant moment in history. And so let's read Matthew's account today. So we're going to be in Matthew 21, starting in verse 1, going through verse 11. It says, when they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this, the Lord needs them. That should be enough for anyone, right? And he will send them immediately. This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, saying, tell your daughter Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and were followed were shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. When he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, who is this? The crowds were saying, this is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee. So we see this picture, and the people are fired up to see Jesus. Because the things that would have come to their mind, like seeing Jesus ride in on this donkey, would have immediately brought to their mind a story in 1 Kings 1, where if you're not familiar with this story, basically as King David is on his deathbed, one of his sons, Adonijah, plans to usurp the throne. And so King David, in response, who had already appointed Solomon as his heir, directed that Solomon be placed on a donkey and be led through town to publicly coronate him. Yeah, his personal, which it says it was his personal mule, so I'm like, why did King David have this personal mule? Apparently he really liked this mule. Anyway, he places Solomon on this mule, has him paraded through town to coronate him publicly so everyone can see there's no dispute, and thwarts Adonijah's plan, saying that Solomon is the true king. He is the one in charge. This would also bring to mind the Roman processions, in which the Roman officials would often go into conquered nations, into territories, in this triumphant, proud way, basically saying, we are the ones with power, and we are the ones with authority. And so the people are super excited about this, and they're totally on board. They see Jesus coming in, and immediately they're thinking, he's our king, he's our Messiah, he's the one that's going to liberate us from these oppressors, liberate us from the false king Caesar. And so they start basically shouting Hosanna. They're grabbing palm branches, waving them in the air, and creating their own red carpet of sorts with their cloaks and with the branches. And really what this is communicating, what they're doing, is that they're screaming for rebellion. They are ready to overthrow the false king. They are ready to cast off their chains and get out from under the thumb of Rome. Their mind was for rebellion, and yet Jesus had a very different revolution in mind. While the crowds recognized the significance of his triumphant entry, they failed to recognize the significance of the donkey. Which, that's why I have a picture of Donkey from Shrek up there. They're like, why do we have Donkey from Shrek up there? There's a significance in the fact of why Jesus was riding in on a donkey. One, to connect him to that story in 1 Kings 1, but also this, in Zechariah 9:9, that Matthew's account quotes. It says, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout in triumph, daughter Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious, but humble, riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So the significance of the donkey is this. As much as Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem was a statement of his sovereignty, it was also a statement of his humility. As much as it was a statement of his power, of his dominance, that he is in control, it is also a statement of his meekness, of his lowliness. And while Adonijah's power play was to have this hostile takeover, Jesus is our Prince of Peace. While the Romans were parading through towns atop white stallions to communicate dominance and military might, Jesus was our suffering Savior. So the members of this crowd cheering on Jesus, they're wanting a warrior Messiah. They're wanting someone who will liberate them through violence. And yet Jesus' path to victory was to make himself small to uplift us all. A humility so profound that he would bear a cross by week's end. Not at all the Messiah that they expected. And as the story goes, the people's opinion of Jesus drastically changed in a matter of days. Days. They turn on him. Jesus thoroughly upset the apple cart by both disturbing the status quo of a few comfortable religious Jewish leaders, while also he comes in challenging the entire Jewish community's presuppositions about God and their status before him. The people that desperately sought to peel themselves away from Rome saw this abnormal Messiah not only as a disappointment, but as an insult upon their injury. He was not at all what they expected. And they failed to see the deeper freedom that he was offering them, and chose not to embrace the mystery of his path to victory. This person claiming to be the Messiah was nothing like the figurehead they expected, so they imprisoned, tortured, and killed him. But in 3 days' time, of course, we know that he has the final word. And it's not a word of retribution, it's a word of resurrection for himself and for all of those who were on his side, who would have chosen to be on his side and also in the future would choose to be on his side. To sum this up, the people turned on Jesus because they had very different win conditions than Jesus. Now, for all my fellow board game lovers, win conditions is a very important thing. It's a very important thing. So I've been spending time getting to know a lot of people in Tribe who I know share that same interest of board games. I'll never get tired of talking about it. But one of the most important things about teaching people new board games is that they have to understand the win conditions, what you need to do to win, and the strategies about how you actually go about that. And so, for instance, people here may know of Settlers of Catan, and the win conditions for Settlers of Catan is that you need 10 victory points to win. You get this by building settlements, by building cities, by having the largest army, the longest road, and by finding victory cards in the development deck. And to some of you, you're like, that's absolute gibberish. I understand. It's okay. It's very important to me. But imagine you had a very different win condition, and so you decided you wanted to collect all of the sheep resource cards because you love rolling in the sheep. Thank you, Adele, for that one. Yeah, thank you. That would do absolutely nothing to help you win the game. You might succeed at that. You might get all of the sheep cards, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day if you're going against the win conditions of the game. And so in the same way, when our win conditions for life are not aligned with God's win conditions, that's a losing battle. Every time, it's a losing battle. And now, additionally, even when we sync up with God's win conditions, even when we're on board and we say, God, I want to win the way that you want me to win, we may still have to wait for the win. So consider the fact not only about Jesus' death, but also his burial. It's important. He was in the tomb for 3 days. His triumphant entry was no less a victory for having to wait in the tomb for 3 days. And likewise, Christ's resurrection from the dead and victory over sin and death is no less a triumph for the fact that we've had to wait these centuries for his return. Patience is built, it's like cake, built into the cake. It's baked into the pie, however you want to say it. It is a part of the process. Because when it comes to God's mysterious path to victory, it often involves this principle of now and not yet. I don't know if you've heard that before, but this kind of is kicked around in like theological circles, this idea of now and not yet. For instance, when a person gets baptized, in a very real sense, they are liberated from their sins, period. But how many of us who are baptized here today still sin? Oh, some people are refusing to admit it. We all still sin, right? We all still struggle with sin. We still feel the effects of our sin. And so, in one way, yes, we are liberated from our sin. It doesn't have control over us. It doesn't have the final word. But we're still waiting for a future glory in which we will be truly liberated from our sin. Never have to even deal with it ever again. What a wonderful thought. And so that's kind of this idea of now and not yet. We, as people of God, we often presently experience in part what we will also see made complete in the future. So we're really left with these two questions then, with this idea of win conditions. Are you willing to trade your win conditions for God's win conditions? Because that's the first step. We're going for the sheep and not going for the victory points. We're going to lose. Are you willing to trade your win conditions for God's win conditions? And likewise, are you willing to wait to see his win conditions fully realized? So for me, an example of this that came to mind was just my story through singlehood. Now, sometimes I think people who have been married for a while, we can almost lose the experience, our memories of the experience of some of the difficulties that come from singlehood. And I'm not going to stand here and say that you can't be just as fully fulfilled and happy and joyful as a single person. That's not what I'm trying to convey. But at least for me personally, I would experience loneliness and insecurities as I'm trying to find a good, godly partner. That was something I always longed for as a kid. And so I remember in high school, my first couple dating relationships, I decided to have my own win conditions. And so I dated these girls that I knew weren't good for me. I knew didn't have the same convictions, and it didn't end well. It was a couple years between the two relationships of things I'm just not proud of, and I wouldn't have wanted to replicate again, and I did learn my lesson. So, but still, in terms of patience, in terms of waiting, it still took years of then trying to do it God's way, adopting his win conditions, trying to find a good, godly complement, someone who would help me be spiritual, who would be righteous and holy. And, there were different girls in the church that I was interested in, and it wasn't reciprocated. And that's, it's real life, right? And so after years of that, I know your story. Yeah. And so after years of that, I was tempted to go back, right? To do it my own way. Because I'm going to tell you, I was one of two boys in a music therapy program with a lot of women, beautiful women, smart women, talented women. Didn't share the same values, but it was close enough, right? In my mind, it was so easy. I could so easily have the pick of the lot. Even at SPU, there was like 4 girls to every 1 guy. So I had a lot of options, and yet at the same time, I decided, through wrestling and prayer, I got to this point with God where I said, God, even if this never happens, I am with you, and I am not going anywhere. I am not going to try and carve my own path. I am going to stay with your win conditions for my life. And so even if that means me being single the rest of my life, that is perfectly fine. And I'm not going to say this will happen to everybody, but for me, it was literally months later that Elise and I connected. Months. Like, it was a blink of an eye, and we were dating, and within that same year, we had gotten engaged and got married. It's incredible. God's timing was amazing. It was probably a turnaround of maybe 1 year or so of going from that point of saying, God, I'm not going anywhere, to now I'm married. And so again, it's not about the outcome so much as, will you trust God with his win conditions? And are you willing to wait when it feels like it's just like so hard? You're just deeply longing for something, and yet you know that you have to wait it out and let God be in control. The honest truth is that apart from clear promises in Scripture about the core things of salvation, we never really know what God is up to. There is some truth in that old hymn that talks about God moving in mysterious ways. He absolutely does. And a story that comes to mind, this parable that I heard one time someone shared in a Bible study that really stuck with me about this, where we never really know fully what God's up to. I call it the parable of the rancher. I don't know if it actually has a title or anything, but it goes like this. So there's a rancher who builds a fence. And one day, a big gust of wind comes in and knocks the fence down. So his neighbors come up to him and say, "What terrible luck. You spent all that time making the fence only to have it blown down." And the rancher says, "God moves in mysterious ways. What do I know about good or bad luck?" The next day, as he's fixing his fence, a herd of wild horses comes by, and just as he's finishing the fence, 20 of them get caught in the stable. And his neighbors come by and say, "What fantastic luck. Had your fence not blown down, you wouldn't have caught all these horses." And he says, "God moves in a mysterious way. What do I know about good or bad luck?" The next day, his son goes out to tame one of the horses, gets bucked off, and breaks his leg. His neighbors come by and say, "Oh, poor rancher. What terrible luck you've had. Had you not gotten these horses, this wouldn't have happened to your son." He says, "God moves in a mysterious way. What do I know about good or bad luck?" The next day, a herd of raiders come through, collecting a militia of young men for their military. And they leave his son because he's not able to go. And then his neighbors say, "What great luck you were able to keep your son when we've all lost ours." He says, "God moves in a mysterious way. What do I know about good or bad luck?" I like that story because we just never know what'll come of the things that we think are so good and turn out in ways that are kind of sour, or things that are so terrible and painful and yet turn around and have certain weird blessings. God moves in mysterious ways. So even in the story I talked about at the beginning of my dad's death, it's crazy because this turned around in some really unexpected blessings. One, there was a woman named Mary who was a part of the church that my parents are in Southern California. And when my dad died, she was kind of on the fence about her relationship with God. And the thing that she said that made her take it more seriously, the reason why she said life is short and I need to figure out my relationship with God, was because of my dad's death. For me, too, we had the unexpected blessing of then being able to buy a house in very expensive Seattle because of, these just money that came from insurance, from a wrongful death suit that we didn't file, but I guess was just part of his insurance policy. And so we were able to buy a house. I also believe that it's also brought my family together more because we've now kind of had more conversations working through some of our dysfunctions because, again, time is short. We should probably work on those things. None of those things, they could have happened, right, in different ways, possibly. But at the same time, I see the direct connections now, in retrospect, of how this, one of the most devastating things in my life, turned into surprising, unexpected victories, unexpected blessings. And even if these things didn't happen, or I simply couldn't see the positive outcomes, Romans 8 tells us that even in the midst of our hardships, he's talking to persecuted Christians who are being rounded up, thrown into the Colosseum, torn apart by lions, beheaded, shot with arrows, crazy things. He's saying he's talking to a persecuted people. And he says, God is working all things out for the good. And more than that, he says, regardless of our circumstances, we are more than conquerors if only we have the love of Christ. That's enough. Even if there are no positive outcomes, or you cannot see them, you never see them. Maybe somebody else reaps the benefits and you never see. It's enough that we have the love of Christ and we are still more than conquerors. So I have just some action points for you, a call to action. Some ideas of things that you can do this week to be able to live into this idea of embracing the mystery of God's path to victory. One is list 2 or 3 hardships and pray over them, committing them to God. Saying, you are bigger than these things. You're bigger than these hardships. I will not let these hardships define me, and I'll let you be in control of them. Similarly, but a little different, list 2 or 3 of your win conditions. What are the things I'm expecting in life for me to have the good life? I'm waiting for these things to happen so that I'm joyful and happy. List those things, pray over them, submitting them to God, saying, God, if these are in your will, amen. If they're not, let me trust and give control over to you. And then also, this is a breath prayer that I created. I mean, it's very simple, but it's been helping me too in this course that I've been going through at Harding University. We've been doing kind of these different spiritual disciplines, and so this is a breath prayer, basically where you, as you breathe in, you say one phrase. As you breathe out, you say another phrase. As you breathe in, you say another phrase, and out. So mine is, I know you're with me. I know you love me. You're all I need. Let it sink in. For me, that's simple, but really profound. I'd encourage you to do that in your quiet times with God this week. I know you're with me. I know you love me. You're all I need. So whatever happens, whatever your win conditions are, whatever your hardships are, this can be the cure, this mindset in which you can embrace God's victory, his mysterious, crazy, elusive victory. So as we close, there's just this little interesting detail about Matthew's account that's different than the others. If you've spent much time reading through these stories and comparing them, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, Matthew has one difference. And there's actually a pattern of him doing this in his gospel. I didn't realize this, but I went back through it. When a commentator talked about this, I went back to double check it, and it's weird that he does this. He has a pattern of doubling people, or in this case, animals, in stories that other gospels only report one. It's weird. Go through Mark, Luke, and John, and he only talks about one donkey. But in this case, for whatever reason, he lists two. And so people are asking, why does he do that? There's examples of the famous story of the demoniacs, of Legion being cast into the pigs. All the other accounts say there's one man. Matthew's is two. There's a couple stories also, 2 different points in Matthew 9, verses 27 through 21, and Matthew 20, verses 29 through 34, where Jesus heals 2 blind men, where the parallel accounts in the other scriptures, only one. So does Matthew have double vision? Like, does he need glasses? Is that what's going on? So some scholars believe that this is a device used to invite the listener into the story. Isn't that incredible? So Matthew's story, if we were to understand what he's trying to say now in this story then, is if Jesus is riding on one donkey, he's welcoming you to ride on the second. Will you join me, he says, as I go into my victory? It will involve trouble. It will require trust, but I will have the triumph. Will you join me? And so that's the question. Will you join him today? Will you jump on board and participate in his triumph? For however many troubles that will bring your way, how much trust it will require, will you embrace the mystery of Jesus' path to victory? Let's pray for communion. God, your ways are always higher, and your plan is always good. As that song, Sea of Victory, said that we just sang, God, we trust that your ways are better. The way that you think is so different from us. It's foreign to us. It can feel a little weird and mysterious. And the ways that you want to see things play out in the world, God, can go so contrary to our desires. But God, Jesus submitted his desires in Gethsemane, where he said, I don't want to bear this cross. I don't want to bear this trouble. I don't want to have to trust in this circumstance. I want my life. And he's sweating profusely, wanting to live. And yet he says, not what I will, but what you will. God, may we have that same heart. May we give over our hardships to you, trusting you fully. May we give over all of our win conditions, adopting your own. May we trust that your Son started this, that he's not calling us to something that he didn't already do. God, we love you. We trust you. We know you are for us, you are not against us, and you will turn all things out for our good. May we look forward to Easter, the time of resurrection, as a time to celebrate you, and also to take a look at our own lives and say, do I want to try and wrestle life to take control of it and go a path that only ends up leading to death? Or shall I lay down my life, give up the very world, so that we would receive everything in return? Receive your resurrection. God, we love you and pray this all in your Son's name. Amen.
Hello, everyone. Hi. It's so great to be here. I have the honor of interviewing my friend Jamin for a tribe story. And Jamin, I know you had shared with Riley and I a little bit about a story about your job, and we felt like it fit in really well with this idea of God having very unexpected ways to bring about very unexpected victories. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
No, I wouldn't mind. Is the mic working? Okay. Yeah, so hello, those of you who don't know me. My name is Jamin. I've been with this community for over 8 years now. Yeah, I've been here since I was in college. It's been a great ride. But yeah, I mean, just to cut to the chase here, recently I experienced a layoff. A lot of those have been going on, and as Elise mentioned, I think they wanted me to share because it kind of goes along with the theme of the messages that's been shared for the past few weeks here. Trouble, right? Trouble, trust, and triumph. And I like to start my story from before the trouble, just to kind of put things in context here. By trade, I'm a tech salesperson. Who in Austin isn't? So, yeah, I'm in software sales. It's an exciting role, but it has huge ups and downs, quite frequently. I see the nodding head of Marcus there, fellow salesman. By the way, if you see a salesman, just pat them on their back and say, "Good job." It's a challenging role, but yeah, I've been in this kind of role for 4 years. And it's a very emotionally taxing job. And about I want to say 8 months ago, I stepped into this exciting role of being a salesperson for this automation company, and it was a small startup based out of UK, and they were starting like a huge US team, and I was hired on as one of the piloting team. So it was really exciting uh, because it was in automation, which is one of my big passion. It gave me a pay bump from my previous role. Pay bump's always good, or so you think. And as a person who's still fairly junior, I'm been in the software sales for 3-4 years. It was a big responsibility. So I felt really blessed, and I felt like it was God's calling for me to accept this job, because what other opportunity am I going to get better than this? So yeah, I took the job 8 months ago, thinking it was going to be great, and yeah, for like the first few months, it was great. I was learning a lot in this industry, and it was very exciting, the opportunity that I had. Now, parallel to my career side of life, in my personal life, I was becoming a father. You might have seen me holding a squirmy baby who refuses to smile at people.
The cutest little girl.
But I have a little girl. Her name's Romina. My wife Angelica and I very much love her, and this automation job came at a perfect time, because the pay bump allowed us to still be relatively financially comfortable, to where we could afford both my wife, who's unemployed by our decision, and Romy's health insurance or whatnot, because it's expensive to be healthy and to see doctors. So yeah, so that was going on. There was a lot of anxiety and nerves that I had around Romy's arrival. So that kind of led me to do the job search to find this automation job. And yeah, it felt like it was all coming together, right? Like, I'm about to become a dad. I got to be a breadwinner for like 2 of my dependents at home. There's a mortgage. Things just seemed to click in place, and I felt very strongly at the time that this was, God was expecting me to stay at this role for a long time. I felt really invested in it emotionally, and it felt really great. Cut to a few months after, I didn't close anything, and for salespeople, that's very discouraging. When you don't close anything, you feel very much like a failure, and you feel very unaccomplished, and it kind of works against you exponentially because of that. You can hear it in your tone. They call it a commission breath, where the other person can tell that you're not very successful at your role just by hearing your tone. And I had a very stinky commission breath. And yeah, I was very unsuccessful. And those of you who are aware, the market was doing not so good in the technology world over winter, especially. And unfortunately, our startup was not doing very good. So the company decided to lay off the headcount that they gained over the summer, and I was part of that headcount. Now, up till now, I felt like I poured my effort, my time, just my whole emotion, and I unintentionally embedded my identity as a fatherhood into that role, and my identity as a husband into that role, to where losing the job made me feel like I lost my identity. So I felt especially hurt because of that. And on top of it, I was angry at God, because I felt like, you are the one that wanted me to take this job, or so I thought. Like, why did you give me this job if you're just going to take it away from me after I accomplished absolutely nothing? You know, I've very much felt like I let my wife down. I let my baby down. You know, I unintentionally just drew up this identity as a father, as a provider, you know, in a worldly sense. Like, if I'm not able to help afford the hospital bill or whatever for my kid, I'm not a good father. That's sort of how I've written it out. And on top of getting laid off, I was having a conversation with my wife, and she told me that she felt like I wasn't present at home. And that hurt me because I thought things were going good at home, and it was just my job that was really stressful. She was feeling the pains of me not being emotionally available at home. At home, you know, I may do some chores and I may be at home physically, but emotionally I was not there at all. When I wake up, I'm already thinking like, okay, which company can I call today to sell this, or what can I do differently to be better than I was yesterday. I was constantly 6 hours ahead of myself. When I get home, I'm already thinking about next day. So it was such a chasing after the wind type of mindset, where I was constantly grasping for something that I wanted. And I didn't stop to think about what I should be grasping for. So I know that's a lot of context, but that's essentially the trouble that I went into. I was, you know, jobless, the job that gave me the identity as a father and a husband. I felt betrayed by God. I felt very strongly by that, and it kind of came out of left field. It was just ugly. And yeah, I remember the day that I was told that I was going to lose my job. My boss was very broken down, telling me this because he knew that I had a baby and a wife. Actually, I was one of the only salespeople who had a baby, and he just bawled and offered me to get a meal together, and we got the meal together and whatnot. But during that time, I was not in a good place with God, spiritually speaking. My heart was very hardened at that point. Like if you were to take a journal entry, if you were to take a look at my journal and look at my December journal entries, it was all just questioning God, like why you moved me into this role, like you were supposed to make me successful, you know, like why am I not closing anything? Like, do you even want me to be better off? Like, what's going on here? That was my tone in my journals. Basically, like a spoiled kid who got the wrong Lego set. You know, that's what I sounded like. So yeah, I think I went pretty thorough about my trouble. Now the trust. I had to make a decision to trust God that He had a plan for me to prosper at this point. And that was hard to do because we just lost our only source of income as a family. And actually during the time of, trouble then, our baby got sick for the first time in a while. She has something called a croup, which most parents might notice, yeah. But her cough sounded super bad, like she had trouble breathing. She would have to like gasp for air, and it shocked us. And during the time when we didn't have the health insurance, we had to call the ambulance, and we had to like go through all these procedure and process. That was really stressful. But in the moment, you know, my wife and I kind of prayed for God to just, you know, heal our baby. And as soon as we prayed that together, Romy's fever started to drop. Romy started to, you know, breathe a little bit better. She actually took milk. She was refusing to take milk. So that was the first sort of click that happened within me where before that I didn't really trust God. That I didn't trust that He was going to lead me to a better place. I was just kind of thinking, I'm just gonna do what I can, just on my own. I'm not gonna really rely on anybody here. I'm just gonna be self-reliant. Just gonna do what I can do. At the time with Romy, it was calling the ambulance. But as we prayed, and I put little semblance of trust in God, like, God, like, please, this is our baby. Like, can you just heal her, please? I'm asking you this, please. And just like that, the fever dropped. The paramedic's like, wow, her fever just dropped. She's getting good oxygen levels. So yeah, that was like the first showdown. That was, and that experience was very powerful for me. To where, all right, I'm going to start putting my complete trust in God. I'm going to decide to do this. And it was around this time when I started to share a lot more extensively with people. Hey, recently I lost my job. Can you help me? Or, hey, I recently lost my job. Can I just vent with you? Can I just talk about how frustrating this is? And yeah, I even shared about feeling like a failure. There were lots of guys in this room who prayed with me. Lots of guys here who helped me through this troubling times. I started to make those small steps to trust in God. And something Anhelka and I started to do was we started to, keep gnawing on this verse, Proverbs 16:9, which reads, in a man's heart, he plans his course, but ultimately it's God who establishes his steps. I plan my own course, right, in my hardened heart of like, I'm going to get a good job, I'm going to make this money, and then provide for my kids, or kid. No, that's not a reveal. That's not a reveal. Calm down. That was just the grammatical error. And triumph. Yeah, but I started to trust in Him more and started to put the spiritual discipline into effect. Practically speaking, I started to drop a plan of, applying to different jobs daily. I made it my 40-hour job. And, I prayed, worked, and then I was getting a lot of rejections, right? There's like 600 other people like me who are also laid off, that were also competing for similar roles. But each of those rejections, each of those interviews, it gave me more hope, knowing that, hey, it's gonna come. I'm gonna keep going. And while I was doing this, I got a lot of time back just by not having a job. So I was able to spend time with Romy. I was able to spend time with my wife. We would walk to the park like 4 times a day, which was unthinkable before. And I was able to be very intentional with them. I was emotionally available. And it also helped me redraw, is that a word? Redraw my identity as a father and as a husband. So it created a lot of great dialogue, very productive dialogues between my wife and I. And she's not here today, but she expressed to me during our time that she didn't know who she was as a mother. She didn't know her identity. And during my time of trouble here, by trusting God and having these dialogues with her, we helped each other find who we were as parents. And, I was able to connect better with Romy, finally got her to like smile on cue, figured out the moves, right? And yeah, and things were going great as I took those every steps. And yeah, and that's eventually how I came to realize the triumph that came into this matter. I lost the job that I thought was gifted to me by God. And sure, yeah, He blessed me with the job, right? But that was not His victory points. The winning condition, right? That was not the winning condition. The winning condition in this matter, in this game, was becoming a better father, becoming a better husband, and becoming a better spiritual son. It forced me to deal with the problems that I ignored or were not intentional about, and He put it in the forefront of my mind. And yeah, when I realized that in this, impromptu sabbatical, right? That's when God was like, okay, here's a job. And this, what was supposed to be a 5-step interview process, after the second interview, the manager called back and said, hey, we just decided to just go with you.
Wow,
And I was
awesome.
like, okay, yeah, let me think on it. And yeah, and I remember just kind of celebrating with my wife and family. It just kind of came out of nowhere, but we were very happy that God gave us this job. But more so, we were grateful about the time that I spent, the 2 months that I spent between jobs, where we got to spend time more as a family and just kind of establishing more of the spiritual discipline that was a lot different than when my wife and I were living the dink life, the double income, no kids life. So yeah, as we established those kind of foundation rolling into this job, my heart's at a much better place. I'm still very intentional about my time with my wife and the kid, and yeah, I'm able to be more emotionally be present and be there for my family, which was great.
Well, thank you so much, Jamin. Let's just give him a round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably. I think especially just hearing how your identity was wrapped up in that, and when you lost that job, it really made you question your identity as a father, as a husband. I think that's really relatable. In all types of stories, that root emotion is really relatable. I know it is for me. And just grateful to hear about your transformation of seeing God's victories, His win conditions, differently, and how He opened up your eyes to that. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, but it inspired me while you were talking. But just briefly, what would you say to someone who's in the stage of still feeling like they don't see the win conditions yet, who's still in I've been angry at God, right? At God, what are you doing? I don't see how this is going to be a victory. This isn't what I expected. What would be something that you would say to that person, what would be your advice or your encouragement to them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I would first tell that person, it's okay to be angry. I at times felt like I can't be angry. I got to hold this in. But that's just going to be more destructive. I think it's okay to be angry, but you just got to be able to express it in a very productive way, right? And this is where the community was huge for me, where I was able to reach out to people, friends and families alike, where I was able to share with them, hey, I'm going through this, and it's very frustrating. I'm really mad about what's going on. It's really frustrating. It's not going the way I intended. And by having those outlets, I was able to kind of expel that negative energy, so to speak. And it helped me to put things into perspective better. I had a wider perspective from people who gave me constructive feedback by sharing those things. And by doing so, I could kind of take a step back in this paused motion and take a bigger picture into my eyes, and kind of realize, okay, this is where I fit. And I just had to trust and be open-handed about, okay, God, lead me to where you want me to be at, and I will follow.
Thank you so much for sharing and for just being with us and being vulnerable. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.